Marcus Carter, a 12-year-old black boy, lived in a peaceful neighborhood riddled with social prejudice. That afternoon, the sky was clear, and a gentle breeze swept through the park. Marcus walked alongside Max, his loyal pit bull, whom he considered his best friend. Max had been a birthday gift from his father, Samuel Carter, the city's police chief, to keep Marcus company while his parents were busy. Max bounded happily beside Marcus, his tail wagging nonstop as if declaring it was the perfect day. The park was their favorite spot, a place where Marcus felt free and at ease. But he didn't know that within minutes, his world would be turned upside down. Officer Joe Wilson, a 40-something white man with a cold demeanor, sat in his patrol car nearby. From a distance, he noticed Marcus and Max, and suspicion immediately crept into his mind. To Wilson, a black boy walking a pit bull was nothing short of a potential threat. His deeply ingrained prejudice made every action Marcus took seem suspicious. "Hey, kid, stop right there," Wilson barked as he stepped out of his car with an air of authority. Startled, Marcus turned around to see a man in a police uniform approaching with a stern look. "Is something wrong, officer?" he asked politely, though a sense of unease began to build in his chest. "I'm asking you, what are you doing here? Is that dog dangerous?" Wilson demanded, his tone filled with distrust. "Max isn't dangerous, sir. He's my friend, and he's really gentle," Marcus tried to explain, but Max, sensing the tension, let out a low growl. Wilson stepped closer, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Shut your mouth and keep that dog quiet," he snapped, making Marcus flinch in fear. Max barked loudly, instinctively trying to protect Marcus. Without hesitation, Wilson drew his gun and fired 2 shots directly at Max. The gunshots shattered the tranquil afternoon air. "No, Max!" Marcus screamed, running to his dog, now lying motionless on the ground. "Stupid dog," Wilson muttered under his breath. He turned to Marcus, his gaze filled with disdain. "You should learn to control your dog. I just saved you and everyone else in this park." Marcus stared at him with tear-filled eyes, his heart breaking into pieces. Without a word, he cradled Max in his trembling arms and ran home, his chest aching with grief. Marcus arrived home, stepping through the door with a dazed expression. Max lay lifeless in his arms. His mother, Linda Carter, was preparing dinner in the kitchen. The moment she saw him, she rushed over. "Marcus, what happened? What's wrong with Max?" she asked, her voice trembling. The police officer shot Max," Marcus sobbed, tears streaming down his face. Linda couldn't believe her ears. She pulled Marcus into a tight embrace, trying to comfort him, but anger began to rise within her. "Who did this? Tell me." "Marcus." Marcus recounted everything, from his encounter with Joe Wilson to the moment Max was shot. Linda listened, her fury growing, her hands trembling as they clenched into fists. When Samuel, Marcus's father, arrived home, Linda told him the whole story. "Samuel, you have to do something. Our son was humiliated, and his dog was killed for no reason. How could this happen?" Samuel, calm and principled man, felt a deep pain as he listened to the account. He looked at Marcus and saw the hurt in his son's eyes. "Marcus, I promise I'll get to the bottom of this. But first, you need to rest. Max is gone. But I won't let this matter be forgotten." Linda wasn't satisfied with her husband's calm response. "Samuel, you're the police chief. If you don't stand up for your son, who will? You need to do something now." Samuel nodded, knowing he couldn't delay. He decided he would summon Wilson the next day to get to the truth of the matter. Joe Wilson returned home after his shift, feeling no remorse for his actions. He believed he had merely fulfilled his duty as a police officer. To Wilson, a black boy walking a pit bull was always a potential threat, and shooting Max was, in his mind, necessary to protect the community. When Wilson's wife, Claire, asked about his day, He gave a dismissive response. Nothing special. Some kid was walking a dangerous dog in the park. I handled it. Claire was momentarily taken aback. You handled it? What do you mean? I shot the dog. Not worth talking about, Wilson said, his tone indifferent. Claire fell silent, too afraid to press further. She knew her husband was rigid and sometimes excessive in his work. But this time, something felt off. Meanwhile, Wilson's colleagues at the police department had also heard about the incident. Some felt uneasy about what had happened but were hesitant to speak up, fearing retaliation. Wilson, arrogant and self-assured, was convinced he would never face consequences for his actions. In his bedroom, Marcus sat on his bed, clutching Max's collar. He replayed memories of the happy moments they had shared, morning runs together, Max wagging his tail every time Marcus came home from school, and the nights when Max would sleep at the foot of his bed, as if standing guard. Tears streamed down his face. Unstoppable. Marcus felt like his heart had been ripped apart. He couldn't understand why the world was so unfair. Why was it that, just because he was a black kid, people always looked at him with suspicion? Linda walked in and saw her son consumed by grief. Marcus, I'm here. We'll get through this. My love. Marcus looked up at his mother, his voice hoarse. Mom, did I do something wrong? Why did that officer hate me and Max so much? Linda pulled him into a hug, her heart breaking. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. It's their fault, the fault of people who don't know how to love and respect others. But deep down, Marcus felt a bigger doubt growing. He wondered if this society would ever change or if he would always be judged simply because of the color of his skin. The next morning, Samuel Carter sat at his desk in the police chief's office. On the desk lay the file of Officer Joe Wilson, the man who had shot Max and hurt his son. Samuel wasn't someone who let personal feelings interfere with his work. But this time was different. This was not just about justice. It was about his family's honor and his son's safety. Samuel called Joe Wilson to his office. Wilson arrived with his usual arrogant demeanor. Chief Carter, you wanted to see me? Wilson said, leaning against the doorframe with a smug smile. Samuel motioned for him to sit. I want to discuss the incident that happened yesterday at the park. According to multiple witnesses and my son, you shot a pit bull and acted disrespectfully toward the boy. Can you explain yourself? Wilson shrugged, as if it were a trivial matter. I acted to protect the community. That dog looked aggressive, and the kid couldn't control it. I don't see what I did wrong. Protect the community? Samuel repeated each word deliberately, his eyes locking onto Wilson. From what I understand, Max was a gentle dog. And why did you feel the need to humiliate a child? Do you think that behavior is acceptable? Wilson smirked. That kid disrespected me. I was just responding. And honestly, with people like them, you know as well as I do that sometimes you have to be firm. Samuel felt a storm rising within him at those words, but he kept his composure. Joe, your statements will be documented in the internal investigation. I advise you to prepare yourself because this isn't going to end easily for you. Wilson stood up angrily. If you think you can do anything to me just because that kid happens to be your son, you're mistaken. With that, he stormed out of the office, leaving Samuel with a deep sense of unease. In the days that followed, news of the incident spread throughout the city. Social media platforms were flooded with posts condemning Wilson's actions and demanding justice for Marcus. The black community, long accustomed to unfair treatment, organized meetings to discuss the situation and plan a course of action. At the neighborhood church, a large gathering was held, attended by community leaders and residents. Linda Carter was present and gave a heartfelt speech about the pain her family was enduring. We cannot let this be swept under the rug, Linda said, her voice filled with emotion. We need to stand up not just for Marcus, but for every child out there. Today it's my son, but tomorrow it could be any of our children. The crowd erupted into applause, and a collective agreement was reached to organize a peaceful protest at the park. the very place where the incident had occurred. Meanwhile, Samuel faced immense pressure from all sides. Local officials urged him to resolve the issue quickly to prevent further unrest. His colleagues at the police department began treating him with cold indifference, unwilling to support what they saw as him stirring the pot. Samuel realized that achieving justice would mean not only confronting Wilson but also taking on a system he had once trusted. Samuel was not one to give up easily. He knew that only truth and evidence could crush the lies. He began searching for witnesses at the park. During his investigation, Samuel came across a homeless man named Gerald, who frequently sat on a bench near the area where the incident occurred. Gerald, with weary but sharp eyes, recalled the details vividly. "I saw it all, Chief," Gerald said in a low voice. "That dog didn't do anything wrong. It only barked when the officer got close to the boy. Then he just shot it without any warning. The kid was crying his heart out." Samuel recorded Gerald's statement and thanked him. This was a critical first step in building a case against Wilson. Additionally, Samuel requested the tech team to review security camera footage from around the park. One of the cameras had captured the moment Wilson drew his gun and shot Max without any clear justification. The footage also showed him acting aggressively toward Marcus. As Samuel watched the video, his heart ached. This was undeniable evidence. But he knew using it to charge Wilson would bring a significant backlash against him. Meanwhile, Samuel continued his investigation into Joe Wilson and uncovered shocking truths. Wilson had been involved in several racially charged incidents, all of which had been covered up by the system. An old internal report revealed that Wilson had once used excessive force on an unarmed black teenager. But the case had been swept under the rug due to insufficient evidence. Samuel also discovered numerous complaints from local residents, accusing Wilson of abusing his power, particularly against individuals from minority groups. However, in a police environment riddled with bias, these incidents were never properly addressed. "This system is rotten to its core," Samuel thought to himself. He felt both disheartened and angry, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't stay silent. If he didn't stand up, who would? At the police department, Samuel Carter called for an internal meeting to address the incident involving Joe Wilson. The atmosphere in the room was tense from the outset. Most of the officers present, longtime colleagues of Wilson, regarded Samuel with wary eyes. Samuel knew this meeting wouldn't be easy. "We have an issue that needs to be addressed," Samuel began, his voice calm but firm. "Officer Joe Wilson shot and killed a dog and acted inappropriately toward a 12-year-old boy. This not only violates ethical standards, but has also severely damaged the community's trust in us." Immediately, an officer stood up. It was Paul Hendricks, Wilson's closest friend in the department. "Chief, I think you're blowing this out of proportion. Wilson was just doing his job. If you let personal feelings influence your decisions, you won't have our support." Samuel met Hendricks's gaze, unwavering. "This isn't about personal feelings. It's about justice. Do you realize that if we let this go, we're sending the message that abuse of power is acceptable?" Hendricks pressed on. "Wilson isn't the first to do something like this, and he won't be the last. If you take this further, you'll only tarnish the reputation of the entire department." A few other officers nodded in agreement. Samuel realized he was facing a group more committed to preserving the system than seeking justice. "Let me make myself clear," Samuel said, his tone hardening. "I don't care about our reputation if it's built on injustice. We will see this investigation through to the end. And if anyone has an issue with that, they can walk out of this room right now." No one left, but the silence that followed was heavy with defiance. Samuel knew he had just declared war on a system he had once been a part of. While Samuel dealt with conflicts within the police department, Marcus was on his own journey to confront his pain. Linda, his mother, decided to take him to a support group for children affected by violence or social prejudice. The first time Marcus stepped into the small meeting room, he felt out of place. Around him were children of various ages, each carrying their own heartbreaking story. A curly-haired girl named Jasmine shared how her family had been evicted due to racism. Another boy, Tyler, talked about losing his father in an incident of police violence. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus hesitated. "I don't know what to say. I just know that Max was my best friend. He didn't do anything wrong. But they took him away from me." The room fell silent. Jasmine looked at Marcus with empathetic eyes. "I know how you feel, but you're not alone. We're here for you." Those simple, sincere words brought Marcus a sense of comfort. Slowly, he began to open up, sharing more about his pain and the injustice he had endured. Outside the meeting room, Linda stood watching through the door's small window, her eyes filled with tears. She knew Marcus would never forget Max, but she also saw that he was beginning to find the strength to move forward. While Samuel continued his investigation, he received a call from the mayor's office. "Chief Carter, I need you in my office immediately." The mayor's serious voice echoed over the phone. When Samuel entered the mayor's office, he was greeted by a middle-aged man with a worried expression. Mayor Jackson was a man who prioritized the city's image above all else. "Carter, I've heard about the Wilson incident." The mayor began. "I understand you want to investigate, but you have to realize we can't let this escalate into a full-blown crisis." Samuel crossed his arms, his gaze steady on the mayor. "Sir, this isn't about politics. This is about justice. If we don't act, the public's trust will completely collapse." The mayor sighed, his face growing more strained. "I'm not saying you shouldn't investigate, but handle it quietly. We can't afford more trouble, especially with the media spotlight already on this city." Samuel understood the mayor's intentions, but he couldn't accept compromising on justice. "I'll do my best to avoid chaos, but I won't stop just because of political pressure." The conversation ended in a heavy silence. Samuel knew he was walking a difficult path, but he was resolute in his decision not to back down. The day of the protest arrived. Hundreds of residents gathered at the park, the site of the incident. Signs were held high with messages like, "Justice for Marcus" and "End police violence." Chants echoed through the air, carrying the community's anger and determination. Linda brought Marcus to the protest. Though still hurting, Marcus felt a surge of strength from the support around him. Standing amidst the crowd, holding his mother's hand tightly, he realized he was no longer alone. Samuel arrived at the park, watching from a distance. He wasn't wearing his police uniform but came as a father, a man wanting to hear the voices of the people. He saw familiar faces, residents who had once voted for him, people who believed he would bring fairness and justice. A speaker took the stage, their voice ringing out powerfully. "We're not just demanding justice for Marcus, but for everyone who has been a victim of injustice. This isn't a fight against the police. It's a fight against those who abuse their power." Applause erupted. Marcus looked up at the stage, feeling inspired. He understood that, even though Max could never come back, this fight was about something greater, a future where no one would have to endure what he had. As the crowd chanted, Samuel stepped forward and approached Marcus. He placed a hand on his son's shoulder, looking at him with pride. "I promise you, Marcus, we'll do everything we can to get justice." The two stood there, surrounded by the passionate crowd. Though the road ahead would be long, they knew they weren't alone in this fight. In the days following the protest, Samuel Carter finalized the collection of evidence and prepared to confront Joe Wilson and the corrupt system protecting him within the police department. Despite pressure from local officials and resistance from some of his colleagues, Samuel decided to hold a press conference to reveal the truth to the public. The press conference was held at City Hall, attended by journalists, community leaders, and a large crowd of residents. On the podium, Samuel held a file containing irrefutable evidence, Gerald's witness statement, security camera footage, and records of past incidents involving Wilson. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samuel began, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "Today, I stand here not just as a police chief but as a father and a member of this community. I am here to reveal the truth about an incident that has deeply hurt my family and shaken the trust of the people. He presented each piece of evidence to the cameras. The security camera footage was displayed on a large screen, clearly showing Wilson's excessive use of force and lack of control. Gerald's testimony was quoted, confirming that Max had posed no threat to anyone. Officer Joe Wilson did not act to protect the community, Samuel declared. His actions were driven by personal prejudice. And this is unacceptable. A murmur spread through the room. Some people were stunned by the clear evidence, while others were outraged at how long the system had concealed Wilson's misconduct. Samuel concluded his speech with a promise. I commit to ensuring that, no matter how difficult it may be, we will seek justice not just for Marcus, but for everyone who has been harmed by injustice. Immediately after the press conference, Samuel convened a closed-door meeting at the police department, attended by Wilson and senior colleagues. Samuel knew this would be the greatest challenge of his career. Wilson entered the room with a cold expression, but the unease behind his demeanor was evident. The other officers sat around the table. Their reactions varied. Some appeared to side with Samuel, while others wore expressions of doubt and discontent. Joe Wilson, Samuel began sternly. You've seen the video and the evidence we've gathered. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Wilson scoffed. I don't see anything wrong with my actions. That dog was dangerous, and the kid disrespected me. I acted instinctively to protect the community. Samuel slammed his hand on the table, unable to hold back his frustration. Protect the community? Do you think humiliating a child and killing an innocent dog constitutes protecting the community? You abused your authority, Joe, and you know it. Wilson stared directly at Samuel, trying to maintain a facade of confidence. Carter, you can think what you want, but I'm not the only one who's ever acted this way. If you want to punish me, be prepared to face backlash from within this department. Samuel knew this was not just a battle against Wilson but a fight against a flawed culture within the police force. Yet he refused to back down. Joe, you are hereby suspended effective immediately. I will also initiate an internal investigation and present all evidence to the court. If you think this system can protect you forever, you're wrong. As the incident came to light, Wilson began to feel the pressure mounting from within his own family. His wife, Claire, had endured enough of the criticism from neighbors and acquaintances. Every trip to the market or picking up their son from school brought scrutinizing glances and whispered remarks behind her back. Joe, don't you see how far this has gone? Claire said, her eyes red from tears. Why don't you admit you were wrong and apologize? Do you think you can avoid this forever? Wilson didn't respond. He sat silently in the living room, drinking and staring into space. He, too, was beginning to feel uneasy, but his pride and stubbornness kept him from admitting fault. Even his 10-year-old son started asking questions that left him unsettled. Dad, why do people say you're a bad person? Is it true? The question hit Wilson like a punch to the gut. But instead of answering, he stood up and walked outside, leaving an oppressive silence hanging over the house. After weeks of investigation and struggle, Samuel had gathered enough evidence to bring Wilson's case to court. Before taking that step, however, he decided to hold an internal briefing at the police department. Every officer was present, including Wilson. Colleagues, Samuel began, his voice steady yet firm. I know that conducting an internal investigation against one of our own is not an easy task, but I want to emphasize that our duty is to uphold justice, not to protect those who abuse their power. He laid out all the evidence before the room: surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and records of Wilson's past incidents. The overwhelming proof silenced the room. Joe Wilson will be suspended and will face trial, Samuel stated. This isn't personal. It's about restoring the trust of the community we are sworn to serve. There were a few murmurs of dissent, but most officers remained quiet. unable to refute the evidence. Wilson, standing at the back of the room, glared at Samuel with anger in his eyes. Yet Samuel didn't waver. He knew that, despite the challenges, this was the first step toward changing the system from within. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was tense, as if a string pulled taut. Dozens of residents filled the room, including the Carter family. Marcus sat beside his mother, Linda, his eyes filled with worry. He knew this wasn't just about justice for Max. It was about proving that people like him deserved fairness and equality. Joe Wilson, dressed in a gray suit, sat in the defendant's chair. The arrogance he once carried was gone, replaced by a visible unease. The angry gazes from the audience made him feel like he was trapped in a cage. Beside Wilson sat his defense attorney, who tried to shield him with technical legal arguments. Samuel Carter took the witness stand. As the lead investigator, he methodically presented all the evidence he had gathered. The security camera footage was played for the entire courtroom, clearly showing Wilson drawing his gun and shooting Max despite the dog posing no threat. Witness statements from Gerald were also read aloud, confirming that Marcus and Max had been harmless. Wilson's attorney attempted to argue that his actions were in the interest of public safety, but the evidence was too damning. Additionally, Wilson's record, which included numerous allegations of misconduct, weighed heavily against him. When asked to deliver a final statement, Wilson stood, his voice trembling. I didn't think I was wrong, but if my actions caused harm to the boy and his family, I'm sorry. The apology elicited no sympathy, only fueling the anger of the audience. They could see it lacked genuine remorse. In the end, the court found Joe Wilson guilty. He was permanently dismissed from the police force and sentenced to 5 years in prison for abuse of power and unjustifiable use of a weapon. The courtroom erupted in applause. Marcus gripped his mother's hand tightly, feeling as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted. After the trial, the community not only felt relieved that justice had been served, but also began to question the entire policing system. Those who had been victims of Wilson's abuse, and others like him, came forward courageously, prompting the police department to expand its internal investigations. Samuel realized that exposing Wilson was just the first step. In internal meetings, he pushed for reforms, including enhanced ethics training and the removal of officers who abused their power. Some colleagues resisted, arguing that his actions were damaging the reputation of the department. But Samuel stood firm. True credibility comes from protecting the people, not from hiding our mistakes, Samuel declared during a particularly tense meeting. Meanwhile, Wilson's family faced serious consequences. His wife, Claire, decided to file for divorce and left the city with their son to start a new life. Joe, I can't live with a man who refuses to acknowledge his mistakes, Claire said during their final conversation. Wilson, now stripped of everything but his tarnished name, sat silently in his prison cell, left to confront the fallout of his actions. A few months later, Marcus gradually learned to cope with the pain of losing Max. He joined a community project aimed at helping children who had experienced emotional trauma. Organized by the local church, the project gave Marcus a renewed sense of purpose. During one group meeting, Marcus stood before his peers and shared his story. I used to be so angry. I didn't understand why Max was taken from me. But I realized that anger wouldn't help me move forward. Max wouldn't want me to stay trapped in sadness. I want to turn this pain into something good. Marcus's words moved the group deeply. Several of his peers began to open up about their own experiences, creating a strong sense of connection. From a distance, Linda, Marcus's mother, watched with pride at her son's growth. Soon after, Marcus launched a personal initiative, a fundraising campaign to build a playground for children at the park where Max was shot. Named Light from Max, the campaign gained widespread attention, not just within the community but also across various media outlets. When the playground was completed, Marcus stood before a small statue of Max erected in a corner of the park. Max, you'll always be my best friend. Marcus whispered. In the golden sunlight, he felt Max's presence beside him, still protecting and cheering him on. After months of relentless effort, Samuel began to notice small but meaningful changes within the police department. Younger officers seemed more aware of their responsibilities, and new training programs emphasized that protecting and respecting everyone was their highest calling. At home, the Carter family found peace returning to their lives. One evening, they sat together by the fireplace, talking and laughing. Samuel looked at Linda and Marcus, his heart swelling with pride. Though the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, he believed they had laid the foundation for a better future. On the day of the new playground's opening, Samuel, Linda, and Marcus attended the ceremony. Watching the children play, their faces lit up with joy. Samuel felt that all his efforts had been worth it. A reporter approached Marcus and asked, "What do you think about all of this?" Marcus smiled, his eyes shining with hope. "I think that if we don't give up, we can change the world, bit by bit, but it will happen." The sky was clear, and golden sunlight bathed the playground. A new beginning had arrived, not just for the Carter family but for the entire community. And in Marcus's heart, Max would always live on, a symbol of love and courage.